Henry Kaiser.
Welcome back to All That Jam, where music has no limits. We're joined today by Henry Kaiser. How we doing, Henry?
We're doing good. We're doing it double. Wait, both hands. Double okay.
There you
There we go.
Very nice. Very nice. Boy, you've done a lot. You do a lot. I think most people would say, hey, I'm a good guitar player. That's a lifetime, but we have a lot of stuff there. I guess I just want to
really, I'm a diver. If I meet somebody in an airplane, they say, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a diver," because that's
there. You go.
I've been that longer than I've been a guitar player. So, and they pay me still. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, why don't we start there? And you also teach diving?
Well, I taught diving for 17 years at University of California, Berkeley. And then our program went away in the late 90s. And I've been in the U.S. Antarctic program as a scientific diver since 2001.
And you've chalked quite a few dives. You're up there with some of the most of anybody, huh?
Well, I'm up at about 4,000. There's people, if you have a dive shop and you dive all the time, you'll get a lot more dives more quickly. But I've got the 10th most dives of any human in Antarctica under ice. So
that's good. So what is that? What is that like? I mean, I can't imagine you're under the ice, right? I mean, I just in my head I get like Edgar Allan Poe visions,
it's like, to put it in Grateful Dead terms, it's like being in the middle of the best dark star you've ever heard, and it's a 3D movie with sensurround and smell-o-rama mixed in.
There you go. Very nice. That's fantastic. Now, all right. You said you were diving longer than you were playing guitar. You were what, like 20 when you first started playing guitar?
Yes, I was 20 when I first started playing guitar. I went to a Captain Beefheart concert at Tufts University, and a man named Elliot Ingber, who used the stage name Winged Eel Fingerling with Beefheart, played this amazing guitar solo. And this was October of 71, and I had to go out and buy a guitar the next day, which I did. And when I bought that guitar, I took it back to my dorm room, and I just put a slide on my finger, a slide, and I just made sounds with 4 or 5 records. And here's the weird thing: the records I made the sounds with, I then ended up playing and recording with all of the people on those records decades later. Really weird. Grateful Dead, everybody in the Grateful Dead, Magic Band, Captain Beefheart. Let's see, a guy in Madagascar, Sylvester Randolphison, Sonny Chirac from the Pharoah Sanders album Tawa. Those are the records I played along with. And then I became friends with and played with all those people. Weird.
Yeah. Really weird. Do you feel like being older and how you came to playing the guitar affects, did you have music theory? Were you a music theory student at that point? Or
actually, before I played guitar, I grew up with non-commercial radio and listener-sponsored radio in the San Francisco Bay Area. So that's KPFA, KCN, KMPX. Back in the 60s, when they played really adventurous music and all kinds of things, when they'd play Albert Eiler next to Albert King, next to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, next to Charlie Patton. And so all those things were kind of the same to me. And I had a big record collection and was really crazy about music and listened all the time. And so when I got a guitar, I had all those interests already. And before I got the guitar, the year before in school, because I loved Hindustani music so much, which I'd seen a lot of live, I took a Hindustani music theory class. So I start off with Hindustani music theory. And then when I get a guitar from instruction books and guitar magazines and things, I learned Western musical theory. And I'd listen to enormous amounts of 20th century classical music post-World War II, people like Takemitsu, Nan Caro, Terry Riley, Stockhausen, Morton Feldman, Ligeti. And so I was very curious about that music. So I know a lot about how kind of post-World War II 20th century classical music is structured and how it works, more than I know the rules of how to play a jazz solo over changes, which I could do, but I don't, I use other rules, I use other structures, I use other ways of getting at things.
Right. Do you feel that Western music is limiting with the way it is so structured and rigid?
Well, 90% of the music on the planet is improvised. Western European music has very little improvisation. So it's something that's not like everything else. And when you listen to everything else, you become interested in that. And the Western concept of rhythm is completely different from Chinese concept of rhythm or Korean concept of rhythm or Hindustani or Carnatic concept of rhythms. And I did not find the Western way of dividing things up with divisional metric time to be particularly appetizing or pleasant to listen to. Um, when it becomes the meters with Ziggy Modeles playing drums, it's something else. It's gone from
Right.
that European thing. So that European thing, never my favorite thing. So all those other things have always informed me, too many records, too many CDs, so much listening. I was a radio host on KPFA for 17 years and had a world music show. So I spend a lot of time playing stuff for people.
So something else on the list there. So, well, when the time between you started playing guitar and you released your first album, how many years would
So I
you
think
say that was?
the first recording we made that came out on a record was 1976, which was Guitar Trios with Eugene Chadbourne. I don't know if it came out in 76 or 77. And band we had in Monster Island had a record then. And then I had a record on Chadbourne's label called Ice Death. And then Larry Oakes, Greg Goodman, and I, two musicians in the Bay Area, we started a cooperative label, Meta Language,
Okay.
in 77 or so, and it still exists to this day and still putting out releases. So that's a crazy long amount of time.
That is, and also probably as long you've worked with Cuneiform Records, correct?
Steve Feigenbaum at Cuneiform Records is a wonderful label, and I've had more than several albums, quite a few albums on that label over the years, and it's amazing. He keeps at it. He's the most honest record label I know that really pays all the artists always on time with proper paperwork and stuff. But I've been on, I'm on, I think about somewhere between 414 and 440 albums on all kinds of different labels, counting other people's records. So there's so many. Who knows? I don't even have them all. I wish I did.
I I tell you what, I opened up this whole can of worms, so to
Yeah.
speak, when I was like, all right, I know some of what you did. I know Yo Miles, I knew some of it, but let me jump in. I want to ask you about certain projects, but let me
Sure.
ask you about this celestial squid, because I came across this thing and I was like, wow, this is so fantastic. Never heard of it. How did that project come about?
Well, that's a funny thing. Did you see when you were a youngster? Did you see the James Bond film Doctor No?
Yes, yes.
And it was a super cool experience, right? When you're a kid. So all of the electric guitar in that film is Ray Russell, who was in the John Barry Five. John Barry did the score, and he did an enormous amount of studio work, kind of contemporary with John McLaughlin's studio work before John had his own albums, and then he kind of turned into a crazy experimental guitarist too, as well as playing jazz and doing studio work. And I've had all his records and admired him for years. And this record, The Celestial Squid on the Cuneiform label, is me and Ray Russell together with a lot of my pals in the Bay Area, Michael Mannering on bass, Damon Smith on bass, a horn section. Um, and it's the getting to play with your heroes, which I've fortunately got to do an awful lot. And Ray Russell's one of the best. We have a new record, which we made the very first week of the pandemic in London. And that's just kind of been sitting there. And I'm hoping that'll come out on Cuneiform sometime soon. We have a quartet record with bass drums, and the two of us.
Fantastic. So how was your COVID? We asked people how they spent their COVID, and as I guess horrible as it was for the world, us as a species at large, a lot of musicians, I feel like they got in touch with stuff because they didn't have the pressures of touring or recording or things.
Well, I'm very production oriented. I like making things, and it wasn't really safe to play live gigs. It still isn't here. The COVID levels are the highest they've ever been where I live in my county. It's really bad here now, really, really bad. Ugh. And so, not going out and playing gigs, my substitute was to make video shows and put them where somebody would let me do it on the Cuneiform Records YouTube channel. And for a year, I did weekly shows. Then I did 2 years of monthly shows. And now I just am finishing up the sixth quarterly show today. So I had a year and a half of quarterly shows. And these things, they started off, short 15, 20 minutes. And now they're hour and a half or 2 hours long. And it satisfies the need in me for live performing, and I feel like I'm reaching an audience. I can see the viewer numbers, and I say, okay,
Right.
so this year I played for as many people, even more than I would have if I'd played concerts. So I feel like I'm doing my job
Mm-hmm.
still. So it's that's I feel like I'm doing my job. I guess that's what's important to me. That's my job.
Right. Yeah. We spoke to this guy named Jimmy Montague, and he does yacht rock kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term. But he was talking about that he doesn't want to tour. He doesn't want to ever have to tour, and he wishes that he could get the band together and just do streams every once in a while. So you don't actually have to physically have a band touring, because obviously doing yacht rock you have 8 or 9 people with the
Yes.
horns and everything.
Yes. Just like I just want to go off to diversion for a minute. Because we did a song that was technically a yacht rock song in one of my shows. And I researched yacht rock, and I found out the weirdest thing. Yacht rock, besides being the songs you associate with yacht rock, what determines what yacht rock is today in 2024 is what is on playlists that DJs play at yacht rock parties, and what's on the yacht rock channel on streaming radio and stuff like that. And like other things get dragged in and treated as if they're yacht rock. For instance, Grateful
Mm.
Dead don't get dragged into yacht rock,
Right.
right? The Who don't get dragged into yacht rock, but Led Zeppelin is treated like it's yacht rock.
What, the in through the outdoor stuff, maybe? All of my
No,
love
no,
or
no, no,
something.
no, no. Stairway to Heaven is yacht rock
Oh,
because you listen to it when you were in college if you're an old yacht rock dude. So all these things that were just FM radio staples are now considered to be yacht rock, and then that means that yacht rock bands play those songs too, in with the Doobie Brothers songs and the Michael
right.
McDonald and the other things. So I just found that, and I thought it was interesting, to see who's pure, who cannot be dragged into yacht rock. You can't drag Pinball Wizard into yacht rock.
Right.
You can't drag the Who in, but other things just get sucked in.
Right. It's funny how in the 70s it was album oriented rock, and then at some point in the 80s it became classic rock. And now I put on a classic rock station, and I was like, some of this was recorded after I was born. How is this
Yeah,
classic rock?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, God help me. All right. Let's try, all right, let's get back on track a little bit. You've done a bunch of albums. You've collaborated with a bunch of different people. Wadada, Leo Smith, one of the Yo Miles. Years ago I had a bootleg tape somewhere you guys played live and someone recorded it, and I always found it so fascinating. Can we get into a little bit about how that started and what
Well,
it was exactly?
so Wadada Leo Smith is a great, great, great Afro-American trumpeter of the same stature as Miles Davis, or the greatest, Louis Armstrong, the greatest players of the instrument ever. I met him in 1976 when I was in college, when Chad Bourne and I played a concert in New Haven, Connecticut, where he was. And then he gave us a piece to record on a duet album. And I stayed in touch with Wadada all the years. And sometimes we'd play together. And I was thinking about doing the mid 70s, 74, 75, 70, a little bit of 73 Miles Davis material, which is my favorite Miles Davis material. And I didn't think Wadada would love that stuff, but I asked him, he said, "Oh yeah, I love that." And I said, "You wouldn't want to make a record, would you?" And so we ended up making two, 2 CD sets of pretty much the entire Miles Davis repertoire that was being played in 1974 and 1975, plus a few older things like Jack Johnson, which would crop
Right.
up fragmentarily in Miles's playing, Miles's band's playing. And I just love that music. The guitarists in that band, Pete Cozy, amazing genius of the guitar, and Reggie Lucas, really great rhythm guitar player and very creative harmonic player since he was a student at Pat Martino's. So we did that and we played live several times and we had all-star bands with all kinds of famous people. It was always Wadada and me, and the bass is very important in that music with Michael Manring on
Mm.
bass. And the three of us knew we always had to have the three of us to do Yo Miles. And then Wadada made some electric albums in that vein later on that I've played on. We made one with Thomas Mapfumo from, which is out of print and forgotten, with Thomas Mapfumo from Zimbabwe, which was sort of like Zimbabwe music plus electric Miles Davis. So did a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Loved playing it. We haven't played it for years, but it was great.
Maybe there's a seed in the back of your head now.
Yeah, it's an expensive thing now to
Right.
to do that with a bunch of famous people, so, and we
I
got
hear
to
you.
so many great, with Tom Coster on keyboards and with Steve Smith on drums and
Mm.
so many great people and great horn players, John Chikai. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, yes. Would you say that there is a Henry Kaiser sound?
The way my guitar sounds,
Yes. Mm.
uh, I pull out the same old tired tricks again and again, but I do mix them in with other things, and I think in a blindfold test, somebody who was aware of me would know if it was me or not because I don't sound like other people. But if they don't know it's me,
Mm.
they're not going to know it sounds like me.
Right.
Right.
I just feel like whatever project that you're in, I recognize you, and I always found it fascinating how you walk the line between respecting something like a Yo Miles and what the music was, but also being true to who you are as a player.
Well, we could certainly blame that on my early education in improvisation and personal sound that I learned going to see the Grateful Dead in 1965, 66, 67, on through college years. And in fact, here's a weird story. It's 1965, right? And I think it's 65. And my next door neighbor says, "Hey, look, there's this weird thing happening in San Francisco in that building that we think looks like a big flying saucer." And I go, "What?" I say, "You mean the Longshoremen's Hall at Fisherman's Wharf?" He says, "Yeah. Why don't we go? It's something really weird. Why don't we go over and see what it is?" So we go over. There's a liner outside. There's just starting to let people in. And it's the first big acid test at the Longshoremen's Hall. And so we walk around. We're kids. We're like 12 or 13. And we get to the back and a door opens and a guy comes out in like a bad Hollywood movie spacesuit. And he says, "Hey kids, you want to come in? Come on in. It's free." And he opens the door, lets us go through. And I didn't know till 3 years ago that was Ken Kesey. When I was telling the story to a historian person, he's like, "Yeah, Kesey was in the spacesuit." And so we watched the Grateful Dead just making noise, not playing songs, and Neil Cassidy on top of a ladder swinging around. And so I kind of get in on the ground floor listening to the Grateful Dead. Then I didn't even wasn't even aware that was them. And then I'd get all the records and I'd see a lot of Dead shows and things. And I could understand improvisation from watching them improvise as they did up through 1972 or so. Um, and I understood personal sound from all the guitar players in the San Francisco Bay Area that I grew up seeing live: Garcia, Kekkonen, Barry Melton, Cipollina, all those guys who didn't sound like anybody but themselves. And all of them were exploring and looking for new things. So that set a methodology for me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was seared into your, I mean, 12, 13 years old is young, you know. I remember hearing AC/DC for the first time at 12, and it's still seared into my memory, you know.
How old are you now?
I am 53.
And I'm 72, so I got a head start.
Right, you did get a little bit of a head start
Yeah.
there.
You know, we both have his t-shirts on the same colors today. Isn't that weird? We didn't plan that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Today is orange. Orange is the today's color.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. How about Fred Frith?
So
How did that partnership begin?
Fred Frith was a British guitarist who was in the group Henry Cow on Virgin Records. You know, art rock, kind of coming out of both 20th century classical music and Frank Zappa. And I had all his records, and I met him. And we played together, and we made some records together. I did one little tour of France with Henry Cow playing guitar when he was playing bass, and we made records with Richard Thompson and Drumbo,
Hmm.
John French. So I've had a very long relationship with Fred. We haven't played together for years, and I've been trying to get him, you know, hey, we're getting old. We need to make one more duo record because we made
Right.
3 duo albums I just love years, many, many, many years ago.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you should. I when I turned 50, I had this whole thing that I was 2/3 of the way through my life, and I had this whole existential crisis and made a list of all this stuff I wanted to do. So I completely get that. How about David Lindley? You got to do some really cool stuff with him.
Really cool stuff with David Lindley, who is one of the greatest masters of music I've ever met. He's dead. You know, he died recently, a couple of years ago. And I'd put him up with the great Hindustani musicians like Ali Akbar Khan or Vilayat Khan. Amazing understanding of rhythm. So there was David Lindley, sideman of Jackson Brown, many other people in LA, his band El Rayo X. He and I used amplifiers made by the same guy, Howard Dumble. And somebody asked me to do a track for a Neil Young tribute album that was later released as The Bridge. And I said to Dumble, do you think I could get Lindley to play on it? And I had not met Lindley. And he put us in touch, and Lindley said, sure. And we went in the studio and made this Needle and the Damage Done and Tonight's the Night track with his daughter Roseanne on vocals. And we stayed friends. And then I'd always loved music from Madagascar, which there are only a few records of in the country. Had been closed to the West for a long time. And I saw some German recording engineers went there and made a record. And I saw that you could go there for tourism. I thought, oh, I want to go to Madagascar and take a digital recorder and play some music with people there. And I mentioned it to our mutual friend, Howard Dumble, who made our amplifiers. And then Lindley called me up on the phone and said, I hear you're going to Madagascar. And I'm like, yep. He says, I'd sure like to go. And he said, yeah, I'd really like to go. And I said, what do you mean? Do you mean now with me? He says, yes. And Lindley, who knew more about reggae than anybody in America, didn't travel, hadn't been to Jamaica, didn't travel. I said, why? He says, well, when I was in the band Kaleidoscope in 1967, we played at the Family Dog on the Great Highway, and we did a sound check. Then we had a break, and I went over to the Fly Shacker Zoo, and there was this cage full of lemurs, and I knew what lemurs were, and they were the first lemurs in the U.S. And I went over to the cage, and they were all asleep, but then they all woke up and jumped to the side of the cage and put their arms out through the cage bars, waving at me. And he said, I looked around, there was no guardrail. So I stepped, there were no zookeepers watching. So I stepped over this guardrail, went up against the cage, and they put their hands on me and gave me a telepathic message that I would have a mission to go to Madagascar someday.
Wow.
And I said, you think that's now? And he says, yes. I said, well, that gives us box office. Maybe I can get a record label to play for it. So long story short, 1991, we went to Madagascar. We recorded 8 albums in 2 weeks, and we both established long relationships with musicians from Madagascar and their music. And that was amazing. And then that came out a couple of years later. The label Shanachie Records wanted us to do it again, and we ended up going to Norway, where we made 2 albums with Norwegian musicians, many of whom I'm still in touch with and have close relationships with. And so we got to spend a lot of time together doing those things and working in the field. And then we just stayed friends and shared things about music till he got COVID back in 2020, and he got long COVID, which killed him after a couple of years of misery.
You really, with going to Madagascar, I feel like you really tried to respect and honor what the musicians did and bring them to the forefront.
Well, so here's what we were doing. We were both mad. We were angry at people like Paul Simon, David Byrne, Peter Gabriel, who would rip off the musicians in these countries. Peter Gabriel, all the stuff on the Real World label, he'd register their publishing in his name. So they got the money. Paul Simon, all those songs are South African songs he stole and took credit for and falsely put his name on. We were pissed at that. So we went to feature their music, share it with the rest of the world. We took no money, no payment ever. It's one of the best selling world music records, Roots world music records ever, is World Out of Time. And all the money goes to them. We said normally a publishing company sends 50% to the artist and keeps 50% for doing the publishing work. We got a special deal with the publishing company to give them 90% of the money and only keep 10% for the administration. So we presented their real music, and they wanted to share with us and have us play with them and stuff. We weren't trying to make product of our own. We're,
Right.
what you guys got? Show us. Okay, fun. Let's do this. Yeah, and then so that's the right way to do a world music collaboration. I think this is back in '91, so it's a long time ago. But
Right.
those records sold a crazy amount. It was good. And,
Would you consider yourself an ethnomusicologist?
well, I'm an armchair ethnomusicologist, and I've made records with Hindustani musicians and Korean musicians and Vietnamese musicians, Chinese musicians. Those are kind of the areas that people I've worked with, and the the Madagascar musicians that I've worked with the most. And those are the kind of musics that I could relate to play.
Right. Right. Your relationship with the Grateful Dead.
Yeah,
Can I ask you about that a little bit?
sure.
You when the was the album Those Who Know History Are Doomed to Repeat It. You did a 30-minute Dark Star, other one on the one side. You did the Mason's Children. Um, you've played on other projects, right? Wasn't there a Hendrix project you played with Bob Weir on?
Yeah. So
Um,
here's what happened. So I love the Grateful Dead. I love the improvisation. The Grateful Dead had stopped playing Dark Star. It's getting ready to make this record for SST. I knew Greg Gedgen was a Deadhead. I said, "Hey, can we do? Well, what if we did Dark Star?" He's like, "Yes." So okay. And then I was good friends with Bill Frisell and his band at the time with Kermit Driscoll and Joey Barron and Hank Roberts. And I said, "Hey guys, do you want to play on this record? We'll do Dark Star." And they're like, "Sure. Yeah, that's great. Love to do that." And then Frisell's management tells Frisell, "You'll go to hell. You'll never play music again if you ever have anything to do with Grateful Dead music. You must not do this. I forbid it." And so he was forbidden. And then the rest of the group, they're kind of pissed. They're like, "Yeah, we want to do it." So I called up my friend Glenn Phillips, a great guitarist from the Hampton Grease Band from Atlanta, Georgia. And we got together in a studio and we did these Grateful Dead covers. Then the record came out. I thought, okay, I guess I should give copies to the people in the Grateful Dead who I don't know. And I called up their publicist, Dennis McNally, and said, "Hey, I see you're playing in town. Can I come down and give the guys my record and get them to sign my guitar?" Because I had a guitar I was having everybody
right.
sign. So I came down and did that and had a really nice talk with Garcia and had a good time with everybody. And then they kept me on a permanent laminate guest list for all access for the rest of the Grateful Dead, so I could just go to any show, do what I want. And Garcia and I had a lot of interest in common in books and movies and things like that, so we'd sit in his dressing room and talk about that. And then things would come along. I'd say, "Hey, Weird, do you want to play in this thing we're doing?" Sure, and so I got to play, and I had a band after that with Tom Constantin, who used to be in the Grateful Dead, the Live Dead album, and Ioxomoxoa,
Yep.
and and Anthem of the
Bob
Sun,
Braylove.
and Bob Braylove. Bob Braylove and I played together, still play together for many, many
Mhm.
years. Actually, I've got a video with Tom Constantin of us playing Krzysztof Penderaki's theme to the 1961 Polish film Saragossa Manuscript, coming up in a video show of mine soon. So I got very long relationships with all those people and got to record an album of Braylov's in the Grateful Dead studio. And, um, you know, I didn't care about wanting to be on a laminate or have a backstage pass or go, but I just was friendly with everybody and they seemed to tolerate me, so I got to be part of the family for those years. That's how the Grateful Dead works. If you don't want something, then you're more likely to get it than if you
Right,
want it.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
so
So,
I got
so
I got to see how everything worked, and it was just pretty interesting.
was it called the thing you did with Weir for that? Was that the Communion label that put out that Hendrix tribute? Was it
Uh,
called Obsequious Cheesecake? Because I've always called it Obsequious Cheesecake,
it
and
was
I've
supposed to
heard.
it was supposed to be cheese log. They made a mistake in the thing. But yeah, that then Weir and I had to band the Valentines, and we went to Japan and played, and we played at the Fillmore one time, and it was fun. It was really fun.
The Valentines, right? That had Vince with it, right? Was he in
With
that
With
also?
Vince and Perry Prince on drums and Bobby Vega on bass.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. So fantastic. What made you choose to do Mason's Children on that album all those years ago? Because
Well,
it wasn't a famous song.
no, I knew that song was there, and nobody had really covered Dark Star at that point. There weren't really but a couple of Grateful Dead cover bands on the East Coast who pretty much faithfully tried to sound just like the Dead, and not to go at it in a creative way was an interesting thing to do. And Hunter's such a great writer, and there was a nice song to point out to have that's fun to play. Um, and then I had the Henry Kaiser band with Tom Constantin in it, and we would sometimes play Grateful Dead. We'd always play Dark Star, but we'd sometimes play Grateful Dead material, other one or two other things. But that was like I grew up with those dance bands in the ballrooms in San Francisco. All those bands, Grateful Dead, were dance bands. So that was having a dance band like that.
Right?
You know,
When you have Henry Kaiser band, and like you said, you might play a Dark Star or something sometimes. How do you choose from your catalog what gets played?
I don't know. We just had a bunch of stuff we could play, and we didn't rehearse a lot. And I'd say, well, we decide as we went along what we're playing.
Right, right.
Just like they did the same methodology as the old days.
There you go. There you go. I love the cover you did of Alice in Blunderland. It's
Yeah, that's what seeing Elliot Ingber play Alice in Blunderland from the Captain Beefheart album, The Spotlight King, that's what made me want to go out and play a guitar. And I I just am thinking like Elliot Ingber when I play, the way he phrased and stuff. He's one of the biggest influences on me.
fantastic. That is how I discovered Captain Beefheart, was you covering that song. So you paid it forward.
Yeah.
There. Oh, let me ask you about synesthesia. I heard in an interview that it's something that you have, and something that your wife also has. How does that? Well, a little bit maybe about what it is exactly, but how does that influence or you know interact with your music?
Well, um, my wife, the painter, Brandy Gale, has like the most extreme forms of synesthesia where all her senses are crossed, and not just the five normal senses, but things like positional sense and kinesthetic sense and all kinds of stuff where they're crossed, where she, sees smells, hears colors, etc. And I've got something like that for visual patterns in sort of an imaginary space for colors and things. And that's a musical tool I use. That's how I remember things, are these colored patterns in my head, which you couldn't write down on paper because they're moving and dynamic and psychedelic and crazy. Um, and there were a lot of American experimental filmmakers in the 60s and early 70s who made experimental films like that. People like Jordan Belson, Pat O'Neill, John Whitney, James Whitney. And I loved those films. And I've been a film and TV director since the end of college, and I made experimental films in college. And so now that I do these video shows on the Cuneiform Records webpage, see the green screen behind me back there?
Mm-hmm.
So, we'll perform in front of the green screen, and then I'll make these abstract things that look like the patterns I see when I play music and when I remember music and when I hear music. And so those have been last 4 years, those have been really there around me all the time because I'm putting it out, as kind of a secret message. And here's all this stuff. It's how I think about music, though I don't ever say that. This is me saying it for the first time now, really. Um, so if you look at those videos on the Cuneiform Records YouTube page, you'll see that kind of stuff a lot in the background. And it goes back to the light shows uh,
Mm-hmm.
of my youth in the 60s. And those things connect back to earlier art forms and earlier types of light shows before dance band light shows. And it's just a tradition I like. You see those videos now, oh, like the Sphere in Las Vegas with Fish or Dead
Mm-hmm.
and Company, where they're showing computer videos, but it's not improvised. It's not really that interactive with the music like the old light shows were. And when I do these things, either I make the stuff conform to the music, or I'll look at the abstract stuff while I play and try to have those things be together, because that was the magic thing about liquid light shows in the old days at the Fillmore and the Avalon and Winterland, was that it was interactive. It was part of the improvisation. It was part of something that was there and special in that moment, that included the music, the audience in it, who were had a feedback loop going both with the music and the visuals.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up with it. Here I am, old, wanting to see it again.
You were one of the earliest adopters of using looping for guitar, right?
I was the first person to do a digital loop on a record album. Yes, that's me, 77. And so I was a big adopter of rack effects that were designed for the studio. And about a year later, LA studio guitarists started doing that a lot. And then some rock guitarists started doing that a lot. But I've always been, I like using effects because you can make new sounds that you
Mm-hmm.
never heard before out of the same guitar. And so, yeah, I'm one of the primary people of that. And now I've stopped using things in racks, and because there's so many pedals that do things that things in racks can do. But yeah, now it's a lot of pedals mostly.
All right. Do you still use embellic uh
Alembic
pickups?
guitars.
Yeah,
I,
the pickups.
yes, I really like. I have too many guitars. You can see some in the corner on the other side over there, right there. It's like weird. It's confusing, and I, there's there's always some weird guitar close
Oh,
up. Is that weird?
that's neat. I
No,
love it. It's beautiful.
that's a guitar made in Japan by two women and a guy, called Jersey Girl guitars.
Nice.
Every guitar is one of a kind. They make this one's taproot. Crazy guitar, but yeah. So yeah, so it's all you know, from when Link Ray starts to use fuzz to Hendrix to whatever, people are changing the sound of a guitar with effectors and racks
Mm-hmm.
and pedals, and that's always been something I like, and I like it especially when I can be lazy in what my hands are doing and have the inject something else creative and improvise with the use of effects and pedals.
Right. Rumble is the only instrumental that's ever been banned.
Is it really? Yes,
Yup.
it incites kids to riot, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. You know, yeah.
I love it so much. We always have I have this other YouTube channel called What Plus that focuses mostly on fish. And we always talk about how much the pedals change what it does, having all the pedals and the effects and what that opens up for them, but also does it, take anything away from just the pure raw three chords and the truth, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they each have their place, and sometimes they live in the same space, and sometimes one takes over. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, so you mentioned the films. We can't go without Encounters at the End of the World and the work you did with Werner Herzog. You think something like that? Do you have visions for what you do with the sphere? Maybe that's the better question.
I'd have to know how the technology there works. I assume it's just somebody hitting the keyboard on a computer to play. Play. Okay, now we'll play this. They're playing U.S. blues. Here's the skeleton marching along. I assume that's
Right.
something, and that's not very creative. That's not very interactive. So, um, I don't know how you'd go about doing that there, right, without knowing what the technology is. And
Right.
I can't do it in a live concert. I've done a lot of solo guitar concerts and with other people, sometimes using video that I've shot under the ice in Antarctica as a diver in the U.S. Antarctic program. I've had 13 deployments to Antarctica, and I have tons of video. And I enjoy playing with that live, but I've never got to play with a great light show person like the
Right.
one, like the old days, or a liquid light show person.
Isn't Encounters at the End of the World? Isn't that film about your diving?
Oh, it's about science in Antarctica, and I'm just a small part of it. I was the producer for that film. It's like who's going to bell the cat at the production company. They said make Henry deal with Werner. So, and and I did the soundtrack, and I was a cameraman on it, and we got nominated for an Academy Award, which is nice and
Yes.
unusual, but nice. And so I'd worked on 4 films with Werner, and 2 of them I shot stuff for. 2 of them I did soundtracks for, and it's been a long time. I loved working with Werner. He's one of the great directors. I saw his films in college and were amazed by them. I enjoyed doing film scoring work. I used to in the 80s do a lot of TV film scoring for science documentaries, and before that, I was a director of TV science documentaries. Um, and I've been a video editor for more than 50 years. So from the oldest technology forward. So that's one reason I can make these shows for the Cuneiform YouTube page
Mhm.
is I do know how to shoot and edit video and direct and do that stuff.
How do you approach writing a film soundtrack or a score for a film differently than you do when you're going to put out an album?
I kind of do it in a similar way. If I look at the film, I make a list of where music would go, all the places in the film, and I talk to the director and say, "This is where I think the music should go." And they usually say, "Well, it should go in 2/3 of those places." I said, "But yeah, let me just say it's going to be in those all places." And then we usually people working together in the studio, we improvise or work on a cue for each of those things, but we make 4 cues for each thing that are completely different. And then, so that gives way more music than the film needs. And then the editor decides what to use where, and he can mix and swap and things like that. Um, so that's kind of the way I work. I like improvising with people in the studio, sometimes to picture, sometimes just the idea of what's going to happen in a film. And I have no particular attachment to what ends up there or not. I just try to give them more than they'd ever need, I give them 4 times what they'd ever need and hope they're happy with half of it. Then they have twice as much as they need. That's my
There you
opinion.
go. Is there anything that you are working on now in that arena, in that space?
No, no. Um, most TV shows and things are scored from pre-existing libraries nowadays, and
Mhm.
there's not a lot of creative stuff going on. And I don't have any other really currently successful hot director friends, Werner. But so nobody's naturally going to be coming to me and asking for me because they're not aware of me in the little weird, pocket
Right.
universe I live in.
Right. What about AI?
For music,
Yeah.
well, so I'm interested in dimensions of music that are not melody, harmony, and rhythm. And when they design the AI systems, they design them to look at melody, harmony, and rhythm, and usually Western concepts of rhythm. So they're not interested in timbre. They're not interested in timing in the sense of the timing of a comedian like Jack Benny or Robin Williams, where timing is really important. It doesn't have to do with a metrical thing. Um, so the AI doesn't it's they're not going to ever set it up to look at the language issues I like in music. It's
Mhm.
very, very, very unlikely. They're not going to have anything that sounds like Conlon Nancarrow's play or piano or atmospheres by Yorgi Ligeti or something like that. It's simply not. It's made for making fake Taylor Swift songs, right? Or
Right.
or Jaws film cues.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
It's
That's my nightmare vision of music in 5 years is that incidental music and films and all will be all done with AI.
Yeah, a lot of it will be. I mean, that'll be cheaper than having a sample library, and they train it from the sample libraries. And maybe it means things don't change as fast, or they're not as creative, or maybe they'll put some creative handles on the AI. But
Right.
I know they're not going to have the handles in the places where I want the handles in music for me, whether it's playing guitar or doing a film soundtrack.
Right. They yeah, and the I think part of the issue is Spotify doesn't sell music. They could care less what you're listening to. They sell subscriptions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and they don't
So-
care how they don't care how it sounds. To me, that's who's very timbre sensitive and detailed sensitive. Streaming music's unlistenable. Yeah, yeah, unlistenable.
I
Whatever it
hear
is,
you.
even if it's my favorite thing, it's rendered unlistenable by how they reduce the dynamics in the sound.
Right, right.
And so,
What
no kids. I don't think kids in college are listening to stuff, with good audio systems. We used to have pretty good audio systems back in the ancient days. And so they're missing some dimensions of music. And whether that gets to them through live music or something else, maybe not. I'm just
right?
the old
We talked
dinosaur
to
on my way to the tar bed. I don't know.
we talked to Mark Ruffino, who does the sound for the Today Show, but works with a lot of quote unquote jam bands, and he was saying about mixing in the studio. He has these great speakers. It sounds fantastic, and he has to remember someone's listening on their phone.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's no point in for me in catering to that audience. So my audience gets smaller and smaller.
Right, right. And LPs. What do you make of LPs being the dominant form of physical media for music 100 years later?
Well, it's stupid because they sound terrible because they're horribly mastered and horribly pressed. CDs sound so much better than current LPs, and you waste you're giving so much more money to the oil companies to make the extravagant packaging and the discs for LPs. It's not a good thing, you know. And we had technology 20 years ago to make things that sounded way, way better than CDs sound. Sony had a system. It would have cost 50 cents to put one in every CD player, and it would have sounded as good as the original best studio master sounds. And nope, they didn't want to give that out because they didn't want, there's some records with that, but not, there weren't many and it didn't take over. So I think the LP thing will go away because it doesn't sound good. And it's just about selling, when somebody has 5 versions of an album and making people buy all 5.
The colored vinyl.
I know the statistic from the Songwriter magazine is that LP buyers in the US, 50% of them don't have a record player and they'll never be played. It's to hang on the wall. Would you like to come over and see my etchings? I mean, my LPs on the wall, you know,
Right.
or I'm gonna, this is gonna be worth more than a Superman comic book in 50 years, so I'm gonna put it under the bed and sell it 50 years from now.
And it won't be, trust me.
It won't be.
Well, I talked to Roger Clark from Mission of Burma, and he did an art installation where he took their Mission of Burma's first album and wrote the first letter of every word on it. And that was the artwork all of a sudden. And he said you could play it, but it just skipped through real quick,
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if Good Sound will come back or not. Maybe not while I'm around still. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I hope that you're still going to have these masters, people who go into a studio. I guess even if you do it in your home studio, the quality should be there, right?
Yes, yes, if you set things right, yes. You set it for higher quality, it's higher quality is there. One sad thing is I have all the old analog reel to reel LP masters of all, 100 old records of mine from the 70s and 80s. And they're just degrading, and there's no way to back them up or afford to back them up. So they're all just going to go in the trash. So nobody will be able to have it in good quality ever someday. But
Right.
that's what happens. Things are perishable.
Right. I've like 10 boxes of cassettes in the basement from collecting Grateful Dead bootlegs, and I always say they're just rusting away down there.
Yeah. 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 I know
That's
somebody
crazy.
has an insane amount of cassettes of Grateful Dead bootlegs and is about to transfer them all as a giant project and spend a fortune doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I took a couple tapes out. Like I taped Buzu Chavis once, and I was the only one who taped it, and the soundboard guy, I gave him a little something. He let me tape him, and it was the only one that existed. So I made sure to pull that tape out and transfer it to a digital file
Yeah.
just for posterity there. So what else do you have going on? What can we look for, and where can people find you if they're more interested in your music?
Oh, I don't know. There's plenty of records by me on Amazon. There's specialist dealers like Wayside Music, um, Downtown Music Gallery, Squidco have a lot of my improvised and more experimental stuff. There's some things on Bandcamp. Um, I always say, buy the CD, don't buy the files. Uh, and
Right.
yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I've actually made. I can't even remember what they are. I'd have to get the list out, but I've made 10 albums so far this year. This year, a lot of people wanted to make records, a duet. Let's see, a duet with Ed Pedersen, an album of child ballads with Ed Pedersen, a duet with Bruce Ackley, an album with Mike Baguetta and Andy West and Scott Amendola, and what else? A bunch more.
We'll have to get a
Maybe-
list together, you and I, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, 2 baritone solo guitar albums. What else? It's just been another album with some guy in Ukraine who wanted to make a record remotely with me, and I don't even know anything about him. I just know his name and
Right.
been working on a record.
Right. So you just go. Somebody says, "Here, let's do this." Boom, it's there. You have something in the afternoon that didn't exist in the morning. 10 is a lot in a half a year, I must say.
Yeah, well, yeah, but if I was a studio musician, I'd be making a lot more than that
Right.
in the old days. But so yeah, I'm sitting here. I'm not going out or playing gigs, so might as well
Right.
make records because I love making records. It's so
There
much
you
fun.
go. It's a
So much
beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. All right. Anything else you want to throw out before we go?
Oh, oh. What are your favorite kinds of experimental music? And I'll comment.
My favorite kinds of experimental music. I'm a huge fan of a band called Gorilla Toss, which you
Oh,
might not have heard of.
no.
Very fun. I love what Lee Ronaldo did with
Yeah.
Sonic Youth, and his solo stuff. I'm a big fan of Ornette Coleman. I've always found what he did fascinating. Sun Ra depends on what the Sun Ra is. Sometimes I feel like I'm listening to two different complete songs at the same time, and that throws me off there a little bit.
One of my favorite.
So
When we're done, one of my favorite, the bass player from one of my favorite bands is coming over. We're finishing a track for the video show. It'll be up July 1st. Jen Burns from the Merman. Merman's one of my favorite bands. Are you hip to the Merman?
no, I have not heard the
Oh, you
Merman.
should go to merman.net. Everybody should do that. Psychedelic surf band, just
Oh,
amazing. Been my favorite band for 30 years.
oh,
They're
very nice. So all originals, or do they cover tunes too, or?
occasionally covers, but mostly originals. Very powerful. Jim Thomas, the guitarist, has one of the best guitar sounds I've ever heard in my life. Um, merman.net. The
I
Merman.
have to check that. I'm a huge fan of that sound. There's a band of 4 women out of Canada, Toronto, called the Suffragettes.
Oh, I
Who
don't know about that. That's my wife is Canadian from
okay.
Ontario. So I'll have to ask her about that. She had a
Yeah,
record.
they're fun. They do the beehives, the whole 9 yards, the go-go dresses, the beehives, and they play all surf music, originals and covers.
Yeah. Yeah, the Mermen are way more psychedelic than any other surf band, and not in a power trio being psychedelic. So it's not doesn't mean there's psychedelic sounds. It means the music is real psychedelic stuff.
There's a band out of Colombia, I guess, called Balthus, Balths, that are a surf trio kind of thing, but they have the cumbia thing with it.
Oh, I love cumbia stuff. Yeah, yeah. I
They're really
made a record a couple of years ago, and we did one Peruvian cumbia track on it. It was so fun to play.
that's fun stuff. Fun stuff. All right, very good.
All
Well,
right,
thank you so much for
thank
joining
you,
us.
thank
Yes,
you,
hang out.
listeners.
Yes, hang out for a minute while I run the outro. And everybody watching, if you like what you saw, like, subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. We'll see you soon.